Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. This is the fourth of a 4-episode series regarding the types of unintentional threat triggers we can create for other people. This series is built on exploring the 4 DISC styles. If you have specific questions about the DISC model, also known as the DISC model, you can go to our website, discpersonalitytesting.com. We have a blog there. We have videos. We have assessments. We have training and learning resources, a number of tools you can use to learn more about the DISC model, how it applies, and how you can use it to build better, more productive relationships and to speak more effectively as a leader. Well, today we're going to talk about specifically the cautious style person, the person who has a combination of traits that is primarily reserved or more contemplative, slower paced, and task-oriented, focused on form, function, process, analysis, projects, data, results, those sorts of things. So that combination of a more reserved and contemplative pace with a focus on task accomplishment or factual issues. It creates what's known as the cautious style perspective or high C perspective. And like I've done in the other 3 episodes, we're going to look at both sides of the interaction, what it is that people with cautious traits can do to unintentionally create social threat for others, and what people can do when interacting with people who have cautious traits, create a threat trigger in the mind of the person who has cautious traits. Let's start first with what you can do when you're interacting with a person who has cautious traits that might, for them, be perceived as a threat trigger. Quick reminder that in this series, I'm not talking about threat triggers in the context of physically threatening, that someone's actually afraid for their physical well-being. I'm referring to social, psychological threat triggers that apply to how a person perceives and interprets the world. They become threat triggers in the sense that our emotional and social needs or communication needs are not met by what's happening in the communication. Now, a person with cautious traits tends to be really focused on quality answers and value and excellence. Their view of how to do things is, from their perspective at least, the right way rather than the fastest way or the fun way or the safest way. It's the highest quality way. It's the way that's likely to get the right answer or the best answer. People with the cautious trait also have a relatively low need for interaction or even desire for interaction with other people. So much of their interaction might be driven by or affected by getting the interaction over with as quickly as possible with as little sharing of personal information as possible. When you put that together, the things you can do when you're interacting with a person who has cautious traits that might for them trigger threat is to get too personal too quickly, to ask questions that they perceive to be private questions. And when you do that, that can cause them to become a bit distrusting. Another thing you can do is to have facts that don't completely line up. For example, I was recently reading a book that in one descriptive paragraph commingled data from 2 different sources that were not consistent and they didn't align with each other. Now, I don't want to assume that the author's an idiot or doesn't know what they're talking about. I will say that it was very difficult for me to continue reading that because from the context of the writing, I could not get the data to line up. It just didn't match. And so it triggered that part of my brain, revealing here that I have lots of these cautious traits. It made it very difficult for me to stay engaged with the reading because the facts didn't line up. So anything that makes the facts not line up perfectly, to be inconsistent, triggers a threat trigger for people with cautious traits. Too personal too quickly triggers a threat trigger for person with cautious traits. Making the conversation take longer than they perceive it should take. When your business is done, they probably want to be done. So long stories that take a long time or leave out important details. Those kinds of things are very frustrating for people with cautious traits. High levels of energy can be off-putting for people with cautious traits. So high energy, more personal than is comfortable for them. Long conversation times, great deal of interaction time, large numbers of people all at one time. All of these things can create for people with cautious traits a feeling of social and emotional threat because their preference is to interact one-on-one in high quality, high value conversations about very specific topics, not wide-ranging topics, not personal topics, probably not what happened this weekend. That doesn't mean that people with cautious traits can't learn how to do that. It's just by nature, we tend not to be comfortable with those kind of situations. Now, what is it people with cautious traits can do that would unintentionally trigger a threat for someone else? Well, I'll go with the cross style. Like I've done in the other episodes, it's usually the cross style interaction. When I say cross style, I mean across the DISC spectrum. When you go diagonally, when you look at these on a 4-quadrant model, the diagonal or cross style trait to the person with cautious traits is a person with inspiring traits. A person with inspiring traits has people-oriented and outgoing perspective. Now, what could happen in this interaction is a person who has cautious traits can be very factual, possibly monotone, not show a lot of enthusiasm or expression, maybe not smile a lot. And for a person who has inspiring traits, that monotone, factual, non-smiling interaction can communicate, I don't like you. And since a person with inspiring traits really cares if you like them, if you have cautious traits and you don't learn how to smile, don't learn how to add some inflection, don't learn how to tell some stories, don't learn how to loosen up a little bit, your focus on facts and details can be threatening, socially at least, to a person with inspiring traits. A person with cautious traits could be threatening to a person with dominant traits, again, unintentionally, by focusing too much on the quality of the result rather than the speed of the result. I'm not trying to imply that people with dominant traits don't want good results or good quality answers. It's just that they tend to be more concerned with getting things done quickly or at the lowest cost in preference to highest quality. Not always true, often true. So people with cautious traits can be focused very heavily on the details and the process of what needs to happen to get things done, process, the structure, the quality of result rather than the speed of result, the accuracy or the preciseness of the answer rather than the speed of the answer, which can lead to slower communication patterns, hesitating, slowing down, maybe equivocating on the answer, too many qualifiers. All these kinds of things can create stress and frustration for people with dominant traits who just want an answer. They just want to know what you think. And then a person with cautious traits interacting with a person with supportive traits can sometimes come across as cold and uncaring. By being very factual and precise in our discussion with people, it can come across that we don't care about the other person. And for people with supportive traits, that can be off-putting because people with supportive traits tend to process the world through the relationship filter and are looking for some warmth and sincerity in the interaction. Now, I've just described this as a pure cautious trait interaction. It's important to remember in all 4 of these episodes that we're really blends of these traits. So a person with cautious traits probably has some measure of supportive or dominant traits, or possibly both. Might have some inspiring traits, although that's less common. It's very rare that we'll have a simple and singular style interaction or connection with another person. We typically have blends of these traits. And so a lot of the challenges or potential threat triggers I've talked about can be mitigated a bit by that blending nature. The key is to understand what is your style and what is the style of the other person. Consider what you might do that might unintentionally trigger a threat for them and try to remove that from your communication patterns or replace it with a more effective communication pattern. To understand the things they do that, because of your filter, could trigger you even though they didn't mean to. And remember the idea of benign intent, that when a person does something that causes you a social threat trigger, that doesn't necessarily mean they intended to be threatening to you, or they mean to be rude or disrespectful, or whatever label you attach to their behavior. The idea in applying the DISC model is to learn the DISC model, use it as a way to better understand the people around us, to better understand ourselves, understand the threat triggers we communicate to others, better frame or to receive the threat triggers that other people send towards us so that hopefully we can stop them from being threatening, at least in regard to how we receive them. And by that, to keep elevated emotion out of the conversation as much as possible, at least elevated negative emotion like anger and frustration, so that we can build a connection with other people, communicate more effectively, find ways to bridge the difference between us and others so that we can all talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.